Hey everybody, how's it going? So I've got a very special video for you. Today I am handing the channel over to my very good friend Adam Steele over at Hop Pole Studios, and he's going to teach us about audio production on an iPad. Now, normally this is something I'd like to tackle, but Adam's kind of an expert on this sort of thing, so I figure I will defer to the guy who has the actual knowledge so we can all learn something, myself included. Now, Adam, as you'll recall, did the Ultimate Reaper guide there last year where he takes you through an entire course on how to set up Reaper, record your instruments, track, mix, master, the whole deal on how to work with Reaper. It was a fantastic lesson. I know a bunch of you guys bought it, and if you're a Reaper user and you haven't got it yet, I'd highly recommend picking it up. I'll have a link to that in the description below. But with that being said, let's get to Adam's iPad production guide.
All right, so this video is going to be about how to get yourself started producing audio on an iPad like this one. This is my iPad Pro. I've had this since the very first iPad Pro came out, so I used to use it a lot for business stuff at the time. But I've now had this a few years, and this is when you start asking yourself the questions, well, why not use an iPad? I mean, it's silent, it's powerful, that means I can use it in a lot of places, and using batteries, power banks, interfaces, I can use this pretty much anywhere. So, I'm going to spin the camera around to look at my sofa. We're going to get a little setup going, and show you what you can do with an iPad. I have in front of me my iPad, and at the back here I have a corner of the sofa full of stuff which we'll talk about momentarily. So hopefully on this camera you'll be able to see the iPad just over my shoulder. I'm going to record anything that we do here on the iPad and try and cut in there. And I've got another camera here so I can show you things that we're going to be talking about with a little red piece of tape for a mark. So we've got that too, and that's a powered hub, which I'll come to momentarily. So the first thing you're going to want to do if you are producing on an iPad is have some software on said iPad that you're going to produce with. So in my case, I have chosen Cubasis 3, which is like so. Very pretty, does lots of stuff. You're not going to be able to hear much from it right now. If I press play, you're only hearing that through the speakers of the iPad. And that's what we've got for now. So the way that you would record into an iPad is, sounds obvious, use an interface. There are things that you have to jump through in terms of hoops with that. So the first thing you're going to want to do, if you have anything except for the absolute latest iPad Pros with the USB-C output, is you're going to need to find some way to power your audio interface. If you've got an audio interface that is class compliant, that means it will work with the iPad. If you don't, do some Googling, find out whether your particular interface is going to work with iOS. There'll be loads of questions in the chat. Does this work with iOS? Does that work with iOS? I don't know. Search them all. But generally speaking, a lot of newer interfaces are class compliant, which means that they will work. One of those is the brand new Audient Evo 8, as seen here. So let's get this out of its box. One Evo 8. This has 4 microphone and line inputs, 4 outputs, and all sorts of goodies. It's got a DI on the front, a couple of headphone inputs. Very, very clever little interface. And these came out pretty much as of the time of me filming this. But if I was to try and plug that straight into the iPad, and I have tried with a Lightning to USB-C cable, it won't work. It either will just do nothing, or it will actually come up on the screen saying that the iPad cannot deliver enough power to the interface. Now, if you've got the kind of interface that's got a separate input where you can connect connect it to the AC and that just boots up. Then you can connect the USB-C to the iPad using one of these adapters. This is my slightly battered and well-used adapter for the iPad and also iPhone. This is Lightning on this end to USB-A and Lightning again. So this is the USB 3 version. You can get the USB 2 old one, which doesn't have the Lightning connector on it. The difference is this one, I mean, for audio, it is really no different, but the extra Lightning port on here means that I'll be able to charge the iPad at the same time, because otherwise we are limited by the battery life of the iPad or the iPhone. In this case, I can actually charge it at the same time. So the next thing I need to do is quit Cubase and then plug this in. And then that's going to hang off there. At this point, this is where we can get really clever. This is where we start to get into some of the really cool reasons why I would use an iPad over just, say, a laptop-based production. And that's things like this can be entirely battery-powered forever off things like power bricks. If I was to get a Lightning connector on here and plug this into a power bank, you can also plug this into like a regular iPad charger or any other 5-volt 2-amp output. That's now charging via this connection, charging the iPad. And then that's also got the way that I can connect this Evo up. Now, you're thinking, all right, that's ready, that's good. No, there is a bit of a faff, there is a bit more to it. Because, like I said earlier, if I just plug this USB into the Evo, and I'm going to plug this in here, it's probably going to come up on the screen. So I'll make sure, yeah, the screen's recording. And this is what it says. I'll plug that in, and it's blinking at me. It's coming up. Ah, right. So what's happened is the Evo 8 actually works here a little bit, and it's not supposed to work at all. So what's happening here, and I'm going to cut to camera 3 and put this on here, is that this is now doing something, but I'll bet as soon as I put any sort of actual signal through that, that's going to die. And what happened is I went to input 1 and turned on phantom power for that input, and the whole thing just died. Because it's trying to draw power from the iPad and it can't. It can only draw the tiniest little amount, which isn't enough to drive any sort of high quality audio interface. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. What we now need is one of these. It's starting to get a little bit of a cable jungle, I will admit, but then hey, if you've ever looked behind the desk of most producers, you'll see a tangle of wires anyway. This, I'll put this on camera 3, is a USB hub, but this is a USB powered hub, and that's where this little power socket comes in, because what we can do is we can plug that in either to an adapter in AC, or we can plug that into a power bank. Now that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the connection that plugs in to just the power section of this, and I'm going to plug it in to the other port on that power bank. That way, I know I have a powered USB hub. That's not connected to anything yet, and these little blue lights have come on already. So the next step for me is to plug the cable, take the cable out from the Evo, which isn't working. Take the cable which came with the USB hub, get that in there. And so that's now plugged in. It's getting a little messy, I know. But now one of these, this USB hub is connected to the iPad. So one of these and one of these go together and we have life. And so we have a little bit of a cable mess. But now if I choose an input, I can connect 48-volt phantom power to that input and it's not going to die. And if I go into any particular program like Cubase, that's going to work. If I hit play now, you can see the levels coming up on the Evo. If I let go of that, you can see that I'm blasting this mix out because I've got a limiter and things on that mix. So you can really see that going. And that's great because that means that we are off to the races. And interestingly, even though I'm in the studio and I've got all this stuff around me, this entire setup now isn't using any AC, any mains at all. I could lift this setup and take this anywhere. I could use this on the tour bus. I could use this, I don't know, backstage if there's no AC. I could use this, backstage at a festival. I could swap out the power brick for an AC adapter. So then this works anywhere. This is currently charging the iPad at the same time as providing 48 volts for all 4 of these inputs, 2 headphone outputs, 4 line outputs. So I can do pretty much anything. Now let's look at Cubase. Right, so here we are with a full setup and a new track. I have a lovely guitar here from Vola, the Oz, very, very pretty thing that is. And that thing can sound absolutely brutal. The iPad was supposed to record its own screen, but apparently it's very difficult to do that and have an interface plugged in at the same time, which is a bit of a rare use case anyway. But because of that, I now have camera 2 on all the stuff and camera 3 now trained in very securely on the iPad. So what we're going to do first is we are going to go to a new project, or at least that's what I did. And the top right, there's a button for setup. Unlike some of the more simplistic iPad apps, you can choose what sample rate you want to work at here. You can choose your bit depth, so I've gone for 44.124. You can go into your audio and you can pick different latencies. I'm going with 2.9 milliseconds here. It's not measured in samples for some reason. It's measured in milliseconds. But that's absolutely fine. I can work with that because with a guitar... It's entirely reasonable. There's a fair bit of noise on that signal there, but that's because I'm surrounded by studio lights and all sorts of stuff, which is causing most of the noise. And yeah, so from there, once that's set up, there's also choices in MIDI and arrangement. You can choose how loud the metronome is, which I needed to turn that up. I'll show you there. I went to set up metronome, and there was volume for the metronome there, because my default of 50% wasn't loud enough for me to hear it over the din of this, which I created. Now, let's look at one of these guitars then, because what you can do here is, this is where it gets really clever. If I just solo one of these, I have panned it to the left. I'm going to get rid of setup and bring up the mixer. And I have the guitar group soloed with one of these panned to the left, the one on the left here. Now, if I hit play without the metronome, hello? Sounds decent, sounds brutal. If I was to turn off the amp and go to the group, which I'll talk about in a second, and turn off the processing there, we hear this. Let's just bring that into the center with the pan. Now, it does come with if we click on one of the effects in Insert Effects, there is an amp sim in here, but I honestly don't think it's very good. If I hit record monitoring, it sounds like this. Not ideal, but what you can do instead, I have bought a separate thing which plugs in, which is an audio unit. If you go into the list of effects on the left here, there's the internal effects from Cubase, they are what they say. There's Waves, there are some plugins from Waves which you can get internally. There's Inter-App, which I always find is a little bit dodgy. And then there's audio units, where I found in the App Store that Nembrini Audio make their BST100 Super Overdrive. And with the settings you can see on screen, if I turn that on, might be a little flubby there for something for thrashy. And that comes with its own impulse responses inbuilt and all sorts of goodies, which means that when I play that on its own, it sounds like we heard. Now, as you can see, I used a DI box here, one from a company called Simple Way, which is a really good DI box. You don't necessarily need one with an Evo 8. The Evo 8's a great interface. But I was getting so much extraneous noise from the studio lights and all the other stuff that's going on electronically that it made more sense to use a DI box. And also, I genuinely feel that even with the best interfaces in the world, having the DI separate gives you a bit more quality, but that's an argument for another time. Let's not dive into that too much. But let's go back here to see what I did. There's a blue button with a speaker here, and when that's on, you hear what I'm playing. And you can actually hear. But if you play it back and you're not hearing it, it's because you have to turn that off. So what I did, seeing as though I've already filmed this, there's no point you watching me play it twice, is I recorded this twice on 2 tracks and panned them in the mixer left and right. Classic double tracking, and it sounded like this. Which is really cool. And then what I did is I added, let's just get rid of this. I added down the bottom a group, and the group came up here as guitars, and it asked me which tracks do you want in there. So I chose tracks 1 and 2, which are the guitars. Or they're called track 1 because I'm an idiot. Let's rename this Guitar Right. Guitars right, and track 1. Stupid, I know, but it works. And then I only have to do the EQing and everything once. So I turn on my channel strip, which is based in Cubase, and I've put a little bit of a low cut in there, compressor, saturator, and what I could also do is add in the studio EQ afterwards, and I'm just going to do that now. I'm going to add in a shelf at let's see what types we can. There we go. A 90 hertz cutoff. What are the types? There we go. 10K cutoff. There we go. And driven with the channel strip saturator, and there's a slight compression on there, which you don't need on guitars, but I find can give it a bit of a squish. There we go. That's sounding brutal. Now for the bass. Now you can see I don't have a bass. I have an ironing board. This thing is my 7-string bass, and this thing is a monster. And I learned something very, very cool recently. And that is that because you can add audio units, our friends at Aurora DSP have made Mammoth for the iPad. So let's bring that up. So at the bottom there, you can see the same plugin that Glenn's demoed, that I've demoed on the iPad through Cubase. And without it, it sounds like this. And with, sounds like this. Beast. So if I play that back on its own, now, because I already recorded it, it sounds like this. And I decided to use Waves L1, good old L1, but L1 Plus, and that's just stopping the tops of the notes, as you can see here, just after Mammoth. So that is a monster. And if I play that along with the guitars, I might just go into the guitars there and just brighten the top up a little bit. When I say a little bit, you do have to be a bit careful here because the controls can be rather extreme. That small bump I put there was 10 dB. Now you can do all the regular Cubase editing stuff. You can split, you can mute. The last thing that I did is I added a drum kit. Now I'm going to put this thing down because my word, this is heavy. Oh my word, that's a heavy, beefy boy. So the last thing I did, and I'm going to get rid of solo and everything because everything's soloed and that's just silly, is I added some drums. So I just added in a MIDI channel and chose an instrument, and in the sampler there was a set of kits. AM Aussie kit was the one I picked, and then there was a pad button which gives me literally drum pads on the screen that I can hit. And so I did this in two passes. I did the kick and the snare first, and then I added these cymbals on top, and they play at the same time, which is fantastic because that sounds like this. Doesn't sound like a real drum kit, quote unquote, but it sounds good enough for now. Now, I'm not quite that good at programming drums, but once I'd tapped them in, I could open it up, I could drag boxes around the notes that I wanted, change the velocities, and quantize them with a cue, which, again, I know that Glenn will be frothing at the mouth listening to this, on my own channel, no less, but the idea here for me with the drums is just to have a something to play against, so that when it comes time for me to track real drums, I've got a guide to then give the drummer and go, this is what I was thinking. And that's then there. And also, if the guitar and bass performances are good enough, if the strings are fresh, setup's good, performance is good, I can take all of these effects off. I can take Mammoth off. I can take the Nembrini amp off. And then I have raw DI tracks, which I can then export and send into any other DAW, like, Cubase proper or, my favorite, and go from there. So I find that this is a really good, not just demo writing tool, but apart from maybe the drums, you can make MIDI for, pianos, synths, all sorts of stuff, a lot of which is included. And because of the fact that you can get separate audio unit effects to add in there, this becomes incredibly powerful. You can do so much And between the drums and everything here, I have something that I can play. Sounds good to me. So I know this has been a bit of a faff setting everything up, but I'm gonna make myself one more guitar channel with some nice reverb and delay, and I'm gonna play you out.
All right, just like to say a great big thanks to Adam from Hot Pole Studios for putting that video together. Really enjoyed it. I'd highly recommend subscribing to Adam's channel if you haven't. Once again, links for everything's in the description below. I'll see you guys next time.